So welcome to the another video of this series, that is product development. So as you know that we are running one series on the product development and we have taken the product alternator. So we are trying to find out what are the steps in the development of any components, and we have taken the alternator. In the first video we have given the few specific things and we told that how to select the alternator in particular project when you have the multiple option like AC alternator, DC alternator, and 3 pins connector alternator, 4 pin connector alternator, and multi regulator, mono regulator, right? Rectifier, right? So when you have these many options, then how to select the particular alternator or particular product for your project based on the need. So that particular document by which we tell to the supplier that we need this particular alternator or particular product, that is called the SOR. SOR is nothing but the statement of requirement. So in many mm, different OEM use different terminology. So some of them use SOR, some of them use SOW. SOW is nothing but the statement of work. Someone use product specification, someone use the technical specification, but the meaning of all these terminology is same, that we are telling to the supplier that how we can tell the supplier that this is the requirement of the particular product. So this is the purpose of this document. So we will try to uh, go step by step what are the steps in developing this document. So the first page where we write about the project name. So project name, suppose one example I am taking randomly, that you are working on BMW and BMW i7 series you want to go, and we used to write the code of that particular project. So these are generally the confidential code and you will get in the OEM only. Then you will be having the system, which system you are going to develop. Suppose in alternator, so alternator comes in the charging system, so this is the name of the system. Then what is the document number of that particular document which you are creating? Then component name, so this is the main component for which you are going to give the specification or defining the specification for the supplier, right? Then you have the supplier part number and then the OEM or BMW part number. You just normally we have the OEM part numbers like this. So these are the things we have to give. Sometimes supplier part number will not be there because this is in the initial phase, but your OEM part number would definitely would be there. So these are the basic things in page number 1 you have to define. Then coming to the page number 2, that is the change history. In change history you just tell about the what is changed from the, suppose you are creating revisions, right? So in first sort the particular document is not matured, so you are creating one revision, revision 2, revision 3. So this change history you have to write on that. So these are the basic things you have to keep. Now we will go to the table of content, which is going to be the content which is going to be covered in this document. So starting with this first point, that is the document of scope. So what is the scope of this document? We tell to the supplier that these are the things we are going to do in this document and you please take care of this. And here if you see, this is the page number. So which page number it is coming, that is the normal thing which we see in the normal books as well. So this is the basic thing, but what are the content, this is the important thing you have to tell to the supplier. So first is the document scope. Then scope of the supplier, what is the scope of that particular supplier or vendor which you are going to onboard, right? Then third one is the components scope, that particular component or alternator, what is the scope of this alternator? Then system and part description, the description of the charging system, right? Then operation of the component or function of the alternator, right? What is the function of this alternator, you have to tell to the supplier, right? Vendors. Then circuit integration, how this particular alternator is going to be integrated with the circuit. Okay, that we have the connection to the fuses, we have to the connection to the ECU, we have the connection to the cluster. So this is the circuit integration. So these are the things you have to tell to the supplier. So suppose you do not want the charge lamp, or you are not using suppose ECU, then this particular thing you have to tell to the supplier that I do not want this particular connection. So based on that, if you see that, if you was my last previous video, then we have this particular connector, right? So in that connector you might have seen two pole connector, three pole connector. So based on that, the supplier can decide which how many number of pole or connector need to be used in that alternator. Then what is the operating condition of the components? So operating condition like environmental condition, electrical condition, all those things you have to check of the component. What is the temperature? Suppose alternator is mounted on an engine, right? Or engine temperature is more. So those things you have to tell. Then description of the project, complete work plan of the project, and configuration matrix. So suppose you are working on the one project, so you have to tell the timeline of that project. That suppose if how much time you are going to give to the supplier to develop. Suppose you are going to give the supply the time. I'm just taking one random example, sorry. So suppose you are going to give the time to supplier 6 months or 3 months or 2 months, right? And what are the variant, what are the different variants you are going to cover in that particular description of the project, work plan, and configuration matrix you are going to tell to the supplier. Then material required timeline. So what are the material is going to be used in that, what is the timeline you are giving to the supplier. Then what are the sales regions or of location of that particular product which you are going to develop. I will tell you why it is required, because you need to check the feasibility of serviceability of that particular component, whether the supplier is having the serviceability of that particular component in that location. That's why these sales region and location is required for the supplier. In this you have to see all the all the possible options. Then projected volume. Of course, you need to tell to the supplier that how much is the projected volume. Then vehicle manufacturing location. So this also comes when you are in the that also that manufacturing location is suppose somewhere in that place where the supplier does not have access, and logistic challenges are more. So those things also you have to tell to the supplier. Then condition of the vehicle operating environment. So in what type of environment or operating condition that particular vehicle is going to operate. Then description of the vehicle, then technical detail of the vehicle and engine. So you will be surprised that vehicle I understood because we want to know the each and everything, but engine why? Because in alternator, whether your engine is 3 cylinder, 4 cylinder, 5 cylinder, 6 cylinder, 8 cylinder, okay, these information also require because you are developing the alternator, right? And alternator is connected with the crankshaft. So those information also related for the alternator, and we will see how to relate these information when we are going in the technical specification. Then technical specification of the battery, you know that battery is something you need to know, because you need to specify the, or you need to give the alternator rating, whether you are going to use 55 amps of alternator or 125 amps of alternator or 150 amps of alternator. This will come when you know the specification of the battery. Then electrical requirement, of course, that what are the electrical requirement, how many loads you are going to connect in that particular vehicle. Then requirement of regulator and rectifier, as earlier also I told you, you have the mono multi rectifiers. Then you have to tell this thing whether you need the mono or multi. Then alternator B positive requirement. So of course that this particular terminal how you want, that particular requirement you need to specify for the supplier. Then connector poles and pin requirements. So earlier as I told you, like how many pins of connector you require for the connector. Then mechanical pre-requirement. So suppose you are going to fix that particular alternator on the engine, then how it is going to be fixed on the engine. So that information you have to tell. Then NVH requirements. Uh, the noise vibration requirement, it is very important for any component. Then vehicle coordinate requirement, we will see why it is required, because alternator has some rotation angle requirement as well. We will see those things. Then drawing prerequisite, 3D packaging requirement, and CAE simulation. These all specification you have to tell to the suppliers, right? 3D packaging requirement, suppose if you are going to mount that alternator on the bracket, so how much angle you are going to mount on that particular engine. So these requirements comes into the 3D packaging. Then general requirements, some of the general requirements you will be having. Then regulation, homologation requirement, hazardous material and end of life vehicle requirements. Then what is the target. Then manufacturing requirement. Then goal of product cost, of course you have to give that how much cost that particular component can be developed. Then what is the weight of that particular component, you have to give the target for that. Quality and reliability targets you have to give. Performance objective you have to give. Serviceable available market target you have to give. So suppose right now we have the three location the serviceable for that supplier, then you have to give that, okay, for 4 or 5 location also you need to develop in the future, because we have the plan to launch that particular vehicle into that particular region. Suppose today one Indian OEM is working here and they want to develop a new market in South Africa, right? One example. So you have to tell to the supplier that you have to develop or you have to make the arrangement in that location as well. Then target quality as perceived by the customers. Requirement for proto parts, when the proto parts will come, then what are your requirements. Part identification during the prototype phase. So during the once your part will come in a prototype, then what is the part identification that this particular part is the one which is going to be as a final SOP. Then what is the tooling needs, you have to check out those things and you have to tell those things. Then requirement for inspection, component supply requirement, surface quality and appearance, how the surface quality should be there and appearance it should look like. Then verification of the product requirement. So once the product is developed, then you have to verify that, or verification you have to done, right? So those things you have to lie down, or you have to write down in the document very clearly that what are the verification requirement. Then shipping requirement, validation requirement, DVP and RAR. So this is most important requirement which works for the component development, and it requires a technical sign off during the development also. Then understanding or agreement with the supplier. Then in last you can give the abbreviation whatever you have used in the whole document, and then contact information. So this is the overall component document where you are telling to the supplier that these are the things I need to take care in the development of this alternator. I hope you got what we are trying to say here. If still you have some confusion, once we will go further, you will come to know. This is just a chapter 2. We will discuss all these points in detail. So first is the like document scope. What is the document scope? What does it mean? So alternator SOR goal is to help the prospective supplier to provide a quote, correct? After accounting all the relevant factors like design, development, validation, fixture, tools, gauge, manufacturing, packaging, and sending the alternator assembly to me or to OEM, whatever OEM you are working, or if you are developing by yourself, then you can put yourself. All vendor must submit a comprehensive testing and validation plan together with a PPAP. So whatever vendors you are working with them, then you are going to ask them that testing and validation plan should be together with PPAP. So this is the thing we are telling to the supplier. So supplier should not, you know, should be stick on that what we are telling in this document. It should not go beyond what we are telling. So suppose if you did not mention these things, so supplier can come and say that testing and validation plan was not in that document. Correct. So all these things you have to mention, because you are developing a vendor or you are developing a supplier for that particular component. Then you, the second point is alternator assembly design performance specification are outlined in this specification document unless OEM or I specifically waive them in writing. So we are telling to the supplier, you have to stick on the design and performance specification as outlined in this document. You should not go by your way until we are writing something in the and we are giving that okay, you can write off this thing. The alternator assembly that is supplied in the accordance with the specification must meet all the standards. Then fourth point is alternator assembly will be rejected that does not adhere to the specified requirement. So we are telling to the supplier or to the vendors that if you are not adhering to the particular specification or standards, so those assemblies or alternator will be rejected. Okay. Then fourth one is the SOR may be revised in the light of the conclusion of the technical discussion. So suppose, see, this is a this development is from the scratch, right? Very new development, right? So you will be having some discussion, the technical discussion, that okay, I have this requirement and supplier is saying something different, that you can do in that way. Correct. So there might be change in this document as well. So we are telling to the supplier that SOR may be revised. Matlab change history might come, okay, during the technical discussion, and all supplier will be notified with the final SOR change. So once after technical discussion, after all the changes are included, then final SOR also will be shared to the supplier. So this is the document scope which we are telling to the supplier, that when you are developing this particular alternator, then you have to take care of all these things. Then coming to the next one, then supplier should be free to recommend a different strategy that might produce a more dependable and affordable product. So suppose we have given one requirement. Suppose I told to the supplier that you develop a 125 amps of capacity alternator. Okay. But when I given him the electrical load requirement, and he is saying that you do not require the 125, you can manage in 100 amps itself. And during the discussion, we came on the conclusion that okay, this 100 amps itself is good, right? So supplier should be free to recommend a different strategy. If your product is better, if your product cost is coming down and quality is improving, okay, even if we have said something in this document, I said this thing in the document that 125 amps of alternator I need, but based on the electrical load I need the 100 amps. So supplier can recommend this thing, not a problem. In the response to this SOR, supplier are requested to provide a written feedback and the alternative to the responsible party. So suppose if you are giving some feedback, then you should write back in the written through the mails, and you have to provide the alternative to the responsible party. So I hope you are clear what we are trying to do here, that what are the roles of the suppliers and what we are trying to say by this particular document. So this is the scope of this document. We will try to cover in the next video the second part, that is the scope of this supplier, scope of the component. All these things we are going to discuss in the next video. If you like the content of this video, please like, subscribe and comment, and thank you for your time.